my experience of communicating with policymakers, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in April 2020, a National Command and Operations Center was established under the directives of our Prime Minister in Pakistan. And the purpose of this National Command and Operations Center was to govern policies relevant to COVID-19 and to oversee implementation of COVID-19 efforts across the country. So this NCOC was basically led by our Minister of Planning and Development, and he had a background of economics and finance. And if you see, the national coordinator was a serving Army general. And we also have representation from some Army people just to assist with logistics and all this stuff in coordination. Other members included Minister of Health, our DG Health, then our NIH CEO. So you can see there is a group of people where there are some highly technical experts, but there are some non-technical experts as well. So presenting scientific data to policy makers, it becomes quite challenging. And the reason for that is that most of the time these policymakers, they are non-technical, so they will not understand some of the scientific stuff that we are going to present, especially in the case of genomic epidemiology. And secondly, these policymakers, they are always thinking from a point of implementation. How do we take actions? How does the data how the public health can benefit from your data? So just presenting scientific data to these policymakers will not be enough in most of the situations. So this is just one example where we used our genomic data to inform public health decision making, and I'll show you that if you see on the right side, this graph shows the national COVID-19 case data in Pakistan. So if you see in January, the cases, they were declining. So this is the national case-based data. But on the left side, we have the genomic data, where we can see that the alpha variant, which is shown here in red, it's basically started increasing at the end of January, and if you see in February, there was an exponential increase of alpha variant. However, the national case data was showing opposite. So we immediately reported this data to the NCOC, and we informed that there may be a new surge of cases, and exactly this is what happened. Yeah. So just you can see in March there was a new wave. So the third wave was caused by the alpha variant, and so what it did, so basically we informed the policymakers almost a month before the third wave. So what it did, it gave time to the policymakers. It gave time to take decisions. It gave them time to prepare. And especially at that time, I remember we were at the national level, we were more concerned about procuring diagnostic kits and looking for vaccine procurement. So I think it gave time to these policymakers. And second, very important thing I would like to mention here. Initially, I used to use scientific terminologies, as you mentioned. So I used to call this as the spike gene target failure. So people who are working in the lab, they know that the alpha variant was the first variant of concern that had a 6970 deletion in its spike. So all the cases that had this deletion, they were spike gene target failure based on PCR. And very quickly I realized that I should not be using this. So very immediately, I replaced the term spike gene target failure with alpha, and similarly the other cases with non-alpha. And at that time, NIH, we had limited NGS facility. So we used this PCR, this spike gene target failure, to report the emergence of alpha in Pakistan. So this is, overall view of the genomic surveillance of SARS-CoV-2 in Pakistan. So we have, so far, we can say we have faced 6 waves of SARS-CoV-2. And you can see the third wave was caused by alpha, and then the fourth wave was caused by delta, and then fifth and sixth waves were caused by Omicron and its subvariants. So whenever whenever we did the genomic surveillance, we always used to share this data with our NCOC. So I think it played a very key role before every wave, whether it was the Delta variant wave, the fourth wave, or the fifth or the sixth wave. I think our genomic data played a very key role in timely informing our public health authorities. So another way we used to communicate with our public health policymakers, and previously I showed the example where I used to present to them. So it was mainly verbal communication and using PowerPoint presentations. But we also used to prepare situation reports, and we always put these situation reports at NIH website, and we also shared this with policymakers. But honestly, this contains more of the scientific data. So I always prefer communicating verbally using PowerPoint presentations, using visuals whenever we talk with policymakers. So another example where we have been informing our policymakers is the Mpox outbreak. So the previous NCOC that I showed, that mandate has now been given to NIH. So now the NCOC, it's not the same NCOC that was in the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we have more of the technical experts there. So it is normally led by the CEO of NIH, and sometimes the session is chaired by our Director General of Ministry of Health. So mostly the audience, you can say they are technical, scientific people. So keeping that in mind, and keeping the experience of COVID-19 pandemic, so whenever I used to present to them, so I was more, you can say, scientific or more technical, as compared to presenting to policymakers that were leading the NCOC during the COVID-19 time. So here we again used genomic surveillance to detect the lineage or the clade of Mpox, and it was the first case that we reported of Mpox was an importation from a Gulf country. So we managed to sequence it within 48 hours, and we shared that data with the genomic, with the policymakers, the NCOC. I think in case of Mpox, one of the key things is why genomic data becomes important is because I'm sure you know that there are two clades. So clade 1 has a high mortality rate, it's around 10% reported globally, whereas clade 2 it's less milder, it's mild. So its mortality is less than 1%. And in the previous global outbreak of Mpox, the mortality of clade 2B was around 0.3%. So using genomic surveillance to timely detect the clade and then reporting to the health authorities is important. Just recently, we detected clade 1B case of Mpox in Pakistan. Again, this was a traveler coming from a Gulf country. And again, we did this based on genomic surveillance, and we reported this to our NCOC as well. And we found some changes as well, but fortunately this variant has not spread. So overall, there has been 18 cases reported of Mpox in Pakistan. All of them have been importation from different countries. And what we should not be doing when we are talking to policymakers, especially people who don't have a lot of technical knowledge. So I presented a similar sort of workflow or a flow chart, not this, but similar sort of which was basically showing spike gene target failure, and then what are the mutations, how we can detect it. And I will quote what the chairman of at that time said. He was basically as I mentioned, he was a planning minister at that time. So he said to me, I quote, "Brother, no matter how easily you will interpret this, we will never understand it." So and that came into my mind, and that was fortunately that was just at the start. So after that, I always used to keep it simple. So never, whenever you are presenting to such people, never use these things. And as you mentioned very rightly, it's always good not to use technical jargons, using amino acid terminologies, using mutations, because these people, they using spike gene target failure, they don't understand such things. So lastly, I'll summarize. I think some of the key things that we should, as a scientific people, people who work mostly in the labs, we should consider when we are to communicate with our policymakers. First of all, I think we should know our audience. I think it's very important. So we should be aware that whether the audience that we are talking to, whether do they have the technical background or not. So that really helps in designing your presentation or your talk. You should be very clear about the purpose, what you want to tell, what you want to convey. the content, what you are making, it should be very clear and very concise. And as mentioned, we should not be using very technical terminologies. I think it's always good to use simple. A message should be very simple. I think this is one thing that I've learned, that whatever you are conveying, it should be very clear, very simple. I think using visual, I think this is very important. We all know that we have discussed there are now a lot of EPI tools available. We have the GISID, we have the CZ, Epigen, you mentioned a lot of tools. So I think as scientists, we should always use those graphs, those wonderful pie charts and trees to share and to present our data to these high authorities. I think one key area is to always report data that is, you should be reporting true numbers. As you mentioned, that if you don't know something, it's not important to answer everything. You can always say that, let me check with my team and I'll come back. So and lastly, I would say, I think genomic epidemiology or sharing genomic data with the health authorities, it only becomes useful when we share it in a timely manner, especially in terms of public health surveillance, genomic surveillance when we talk. So if we are sharing data in a retrospective, I think it does not have a lot of importance. So make sure that the data that you are generating, you are sharing it in a timely manner. And lastly, I think Paul mentioned about, so there should be, we should always be using real-time, real-world examples of how genomic surveillance has benefited public health. He mentioned about Lassa fever, and they were doing, sequencing of Lassa fever, and they managed to find a new strain of Lassa fever using genomics or NGS. So I think these type of examples I shared. I think if we share these type of examples with our public health authorities, it becomes very easy to convince them. And just very quickly, I was fortunate to have one of our public health, or you can say international expert on infectious diseases as a Minister of Health at that time. So I remember I advocated him about we need to strengthen genomic surveillance and sequencing capacity in Pakistan. And he was very quick to accepting that. And he said to me, how much money do you need? And I remember that I gave him the number, it was quite a big number, and he said, these are peanuts, I will sign the file, just send me. And we secured that fund. And still we are using that fund. So I think the lesson here is that if you communicate, properly the genomic findings, and if you manage to highlight what public health impact it has, what it can serve the community, I think these people, they are ready to invest into this. So thank you so much. These are some of the, if there are any questions, I'll be able to answer.